March 15, 2023, ASHWOD, Ohio. The air in Judge Aaron Wentworth's courtroom didn't feel like air. It felt like syrup, thick and heavy, every breath a conscious effort for the 50-odd people packed onto the wooden benches. The only sound was the dry rustle of a court reporter's hands poised over her machine and the low, anxious hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. All eyes were fixed on the girl at the defense table. Ilara Sinclair. 14 years old. She looked even smaller in the oversized chair, her feet not quite touching the scuffed linoleum floor. She wore a simple, navy blue sweater, the kind of thing a caring aunt would pick out, suggesting innocence, vulnerability. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a neat, soft ponytail. And she was smiling. It wasn't a big, dramatic grin. Not at all. It was a small, private thing. A tiny upward curl at the corners of her mouth, as if she'd just remembered a delightful secret. Her eyes, a clear, placid blue, scanned the room from behind this faint smile. They passed over the haggard face of her father, slumped in the front row. They glided past the jury, a lineup of strangers trying to mask their discomfort. They even met, for a fleeting second, the lenses of the local news camera at the back, and the smile seemed to solidify, just a little. This was the image the world had begun to know over the past weeks. The tragic, pressured teenage girl, pushed to the brink. The straight-A student and equestrian champion. The victim of a tiger mom's impossible demands. That was the story her high-priced attorney, a man named Clayton Reed with a voice like smoothed marble, had been selling since day one. He'd painted a picture of a home so filled with silent pressure it became a vacuum, and Ilara, a fragile vase inside it, finally cracking. As the bailiff read the formal charge, murder in the second degree, the smile remained. Ilara leaned an inch toward her lawyer, who gave a barely perceptible, confident nod. See? Her entire posture seemed to say, this is all just a formality. A complex game they're playing, and I understand the rules better than they do. I want to ask you to do 2 quick things. First, if you're finding this story as compelling as I am, please hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode. Second, drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. I love hearing from viewers all around the world. Now, to understand how she got here, we have to go back. But before we do, you need to see how this moment ends. Because right then, Judge Wentworth cleared his throat. He was an old man, his face a map of wrinkles and solemn duty, his glasses perpetually perched at the end of his nose. He hadn't said much all morning. He'd been watching, his gaze resting on Ilara longer than on anyone else. Before we proceed with the defendant's presentation, his voice cracked out, dry and final as a dead branch snapping, the court has been made aware of a piece of evidence. Previously categorized as non-essential scene documentation, its full context was, until this morning, overlooked. Clayton Reed was on his feet, smoothness gone. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. The discovery period has. It was provided during discovery, Counselor, Judge Wentworth interrupted, not looking at him. He was looking directly at Ilara. It was simply misunderstood. Until my clerk cross-referenced its timestamp with the defendant's own digital timeline. The state moves to enter it now as Exhibit 47. For clarity. Ilara's smile didn't vanish. Not yet. It froze. It became a static, wax replica of a smile, stuck to her face. Her eyes, so calm a moment before, flickered with a first, quick pulse of something mechanical, a processor encountering an unexpected variable. Given the nature of the evidence, the judge continued, his tone leaving no room for argument, and its direct bearing on the defendant's state of mind and credibility, we will view it now. Bailiff. A large flat-screen monitor to the side of the jury box flickered to life. For a second, the screen was blue. Then, grainy, shaky footage filled it. The timestamp in the bottom corner read, 11:14 p.m. October 28, 2022. The night of the murder. This was from a police officer's body-worn camera. The audio was a chaos of shouted commands, static, and the howl of a distant storm. The video jolted through the pristine Sinclair kitchen, a vase of tulips knocked over, water on the expensive tile. It panned past other officers, past the terrible, still form on the floor covered by a sheet, and for one heartbreaking second, landed on the ashen, shattered face of Ilara's father being held up by a paramedic. Then, the camera swung, unintentionally, into the formal living room. And there she was. Ilara. Dressed in pajamas, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders by a well-meaning officer. For 2, maybe 3 seconds, the officer with the camera was called away, and Ilara was left alone in the frame. And the performance stopped. The hysterical trembling vanished. The wide, terror-stricken eyes went blank. The hand that had been clutching the blanket so desperately relaxed. In those 3 seconds of stolen privacy, in the middle of the chaos she had created, Ilara Sinclair's face was an empty, calm slate. She wasn't grieving. She wasn't in shock. She was assessing. Her eyes tracked across the room, analytical, cool, checking her work. It was the look of a stage manager watching a play, making sure every prop was in place. Then, she heard someone approaching, and in a blink so fast it was chilling, the mask slammed back down. The shoulders hunched, the breath hitched, the face crumpled back into perfect, devastated childhood. The screen went black. The silence in the courtroom was now absolute and utterly different. It was the silence of a vacuum, of breath held in 50 lungs at once. Judge Wentworth slowly removed his glasses. He didn't look at the screen. He looked at the girl whose smile had now completely, utterly dissolved. It wasn't replaced by tears, or anger, or fear. It was replaced by a kind of hollow, dawning understanding. The secret wasn't secret anymore. The game board had been flipped over. "Miss Sinclair," the judge said, his voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the still room. "It seems the court now has a rather different understanding of the performance we are witnessing." That was the moment. The shattering point. That's where this story of a perfect, arrogant crime begins to unravel. This is how a 14-year-old girl, who believed she was the smartest person in any room, engineered her mother's murder and almost got away with it. And this is the one, small thing she forgot that would bring it all crashing down. To understand the girl in that courtroom, you have to see the world she wanted to break out of. So let's rewind the tape. 6 months before the trial. September. The air in Ashwood, Ohio, is turning crisp, and the Sinclair family's modern farmhouse at 2121 Oak Briar Lane is the picture of autumn perfection. Imagine it with me. A deep, wraparound porch with carefully arranged pumpkins. The smell of cinnamon from a plug-in air freshener in the hallway, fighting the sharper scent of fresh-cut pine from the landscaper's weekly visit. Everything is quiet. Not a peaceful quiet. A curated quiet. The kind of silence that feels expensive and heavy. This was Vivian Sinclair's domain. At 44, she was a woman who believed beauty was a moral virtue and order was a form of love. She was an interior designer for wealthy clients, and her own home was her masterpiece, her living portfolio. You could eat off the reclaimed wood floors. The stainless steel appliances in the chef's kitchen didn't have a single fingerprint. It was stunning, and about as warm as a museum after closing time. On this particular Tuesday morning, Vivian is at the large kitchen island, sipping herbal tea from a handmade ceramic mug. She's already dressed in elegant, cream-colored linen, her makeup flawless. She's scrolling through her tablet, looking at fabric swatches for a client's mountain cabin. But her real focus is on the staircase. That's where Ilara appears. 14, dressed in the Ashwood Academy uniform, a pleated plaid skirt and a crisp white blouse. Her backpack is slung over one shoulder. She looks, from a distance, like the daughter in a stock photo. The picture of gentle, academic youth. "Good morning, sweetheart," Vivian says, her voice bright, practiced. "I left a chia seed parfait for you in the fridge. It has those goji berries you liked." Ilara doesn't look at the fridge. She heads straight for the coffee machine, programming a single shot of espresso into a travel cup. "I'm not hungry. I have a pre-calc quiz first period. My cognitive function is optimal with caffeine and an empty stomach." Vivian's smile tightens, just at the edges. She sets her tablet down. "Honey, you need more than just caffeine. You're still growing. And you have equestrian team tryouts after school. You'll need the energy." Ilara turns, the espresso machine whirring behind her. Her face is placid, polite. The tryouts are a formality, mother. My times are already 1.3 seconds faster than any other competitor. The outcome is statistically guaranteed. The parfait would be redundant calories. There it is. The first thread you can pull. It's in the language. Ilara doesn't talk like a teenager. She talks like a small, brilliant CEO giving a quarterly report. Emotions are inefficient. Preferences are statistically insignificant. Her mother's care is redundant. Vivian tries to bridge the gap. She always tries. Well, maybe we could get a smoothie after? Just you and me. We could talk about things. Ilara screws the lid onto her cup. Her eyes meet her mother's. They are clear, intelligent, and completely impenetrable. What things, mother? Your proposed itinerary for my upcoming winter break? The new mindfulness app you want me to use? I've reviewed the data on those. The benefits are largely placebo. A small, wounded silence hangs in the perfectly scented air. Vivian looks down at her tea. I just thought we could talk. Ilara gives a slight, polite nod, the same one she'd give a stranger who held a door for her. Perhaps another time. The bus arrives in 7 minutes. I cannot be late. The driver's schedule is notoriously inconsistent after the 7:15 a.m. stop. And just like that, she's gone. The front door closes with a soft, precise click. Vivian doesn't move for a full minute. Then she picks up her phone. She calls her sister. You can hear the forced cheer melting out of her voice, replaced by a familiar, thin worry. Sarah? Hey. No, everything's fine. It's just, is it normal for a 14-year-old to be so cold? She's like a little scientist studying us. I just want my daughter back. Upstairs, in Ilara's room, the atmosphere is different. It's cool, almost clinical. While the rest of the house is all warm woods and textured fabrics, Ilara's space is a study in minimalist efficiency. The bed is made with hospital corners. There are no posters, no stuffed animals. Just a large, organized desk with 3 monitors. On the main screen, lines of complex code are displayed. On another, a paused lecture from a professor at MIT about game theory. But it's the third screen, the smallest one, that matters most. It's open to a window that looks like a simple text editor. The file is encrypted. The password is 64 characters long. This is Ilara's true home. Her journal. She opens it now, her fingers flying over the keyboard. The entry is time-stamped. Observation log. 9:14 a.m. Subject, maternal unit, Vivian. Interaction, morning nutrient offering and proposed social bonding activity, unscheduled. Analysis, repetition of inefficient emotional strategy. Subject continues to operate on obsolete relationship software, seeking validation through nurturing rituals. My disengagement triggers visible anxiety markers, tightened periocular muscles, vocal stress. Her system is easily disrupted. My own system remains optimal. No new data required. The problem remains, a persistent, sentimental variable obstructing autonomous function. It requires monitoring. She closes the journal. The screen goes dark, reflecting her own calm, unblinking face back at her. Downstairs, her mother is talking in hushed, worried tones about love and connection. Upstairs, Ilara is running diagnostics on a problem. And a problem, to a mind like hers, is just a puzzle waiting for a solution. The gilded cage was perfect, beautiful, and suffocating. And Ilara had just begun to study the lock. The trigger wasn't some dramatic, screaming fight. It was something quieter, and for Ilara, far more insulting. It was an assumption. The assumption that her mind was a problem to be fixed. It happened the following week. Vivian had been talking to her sister, to the school counselor, to anyone who would listen. Her worry had curdled into a plan. She met Ilara at the door after school, before the girl could retreat to her digital fortress upstairs. Honey, we need to talk. I've made an appointment for us. For tomorrow after school. Ilara paused, 1 foot on the bottom stair, her backpack a heavy weight. An appointment for what? My dental cleaning isn't for 5 months. Not that kind of appointment. Vivian took a steadying breath, bracing herself. It's with someone named Dr. Evans. A family therapist. She's supposed to be wonderful with communication issues. For a long second, Ilara just stared. Her face was a blank screen. Then, a single word, flat and cold. No. Ilara, please. It's just to talk. To help us understand each other better. You want to pay a stranger to dissect my cognitive processes because they don't align with your emotional expectations, Ilara stated, her voice eerily calm. That is illogical and a violation of my autonomy. It's not a violation, it's help. Vivian's composure finally frayed. The fear in her voice was plain now. You're my daughter and I feel like I don't even know you anymore. You speak like a robot. You look at me like I'm a specimen. What is happening in your head? That was the wrong question to ask. Because Ilara decided, in that moment, to give her an answer. What is happening, Ilara said, enunciating each word with chilling precision, is that I am optimizing my development in an environment of emotional inefficiency and constant, low-grade demands for performances of affection I do not feel. You are a variable in that environment. A disruptive one. Vivian flinched as if she'd been slapped. The tears that welled in her eyes weren't strategic. They were real, wounded pain. And seeing them didn't soften Ilara. It confirmed her hypothesis. Inefficient. Overly sensitive. A system prone to errors. Until you can agree to participate in fixing this, Vivian said, her voice trembling with a resolve she didn't fully feel, your computer privileges are restricted. No screens after 7 p.m. And we are going to that appointment tomorrow. She turned and walked quickly to the kitchen, leaving Ilara standing at the foot of the stairs. The punishment was meant to be a boundary. A wake-up call. But to Ilara, it was a declaration of war. It wasn't about a computer. It was about control. Her mother wasn't trying to understand her system. She was trying to forcibly overwrite it. This was no longer a mere problem. This was an active threat to her core functionality. She walked upstairs slowly, her mind not racing, but methodically booting up a new program. Contingency planning. She didn't slam her door. She closed it softly. She sat at her pristine desk. The monitors were dark, per the new rule. But the thoughts behind her eyes were brighter, sharper, and more dangerous than any screen. Scenario analysis, her mind began. The maternal unit has escalated from a passive obstacle to an active administrator. She is attempting to install foreign software, therapy, and impose hardware restrictions, screen time. Goal: regain full system control. Option A: compliance. She ran the simulation. Attending therapy, performing remorse, pretending to revert to a more acceptable version of herself. The outcome: constant monitoring. Continued emotional demands. A perpetual, draining performance. A lifetime of inauthenticity. Conclusion: unacceptable. High long-term resource drain. Option B: non-compliance. Defiance. Running away. The outcome: she was 14. The system, the law, social services, her mother's resources, was designed to retrieve her. She would be brought back, labeled troubled, and the restrictions would intensify. Conclusion: unacceptable. Leads to greater confinement. Her mind, a relentless processor, arrived at the third option. The one that had always lingered in the shadowy corners of her logic, now brought into the stark light of necessity. Option C: removal of the administrator. There was no horror in the thought. No flicker of conscience. It was a pure, clean line of logic. If the disruptive variable is removed, the system stabilizes. If the lock on the cage is broken, the occupant is free. It was mathematical. It was, to her, beautiful in its simplicity. The emotional horror of matricide didn't compute. The concept of a mother was just that, a concept, a biological and social function that was currently malfunctioning. Deleting the source of the malfunction was the most efficient path to system optimization. She opened a physical notebook, a simple, black composition book no one would look twice at. She began to write, not in her encrypted journal, but in a shorthand of her own design. This was the blueprint. Project: Autonomy Restoration. Primary Objective: Neutralize Primary Constraint, vs. Secondary Objective: Assume default user controls over personal assets and trajectory. Her pen moved calmly, detailing subroutines. 1. Method: Kinetic Energy Transfer, Firearm. Most efficient. Immediate system shutdown. Source: Paternal Unit Secure Storage, Location known, Combination predictable. 2. Environment: Require audio/visual masking. Optimal window: Predicted thunderstorm. High ambient noise, reduced external witness probability. 3. Post-event narrative: Construct viable alternate threat entity. Burglary scenario: Require staged point of entry, removal of secondary valuables to establish motive. 4. Behavioral protocol: Post-event: Initiate trauma victim, subroutine. Mimic standard stress responses: Confusion, grief, shock. Utilize observed data from media files for realism. She sketched a rough timeline. She noted the password to her father's gun safe, observed once years ago when he thought she was playing with toys. She researched local weather patterns. This was no longer a fantasy or a dark thought experiment. It was a project plan. The fatal flaw wasn't in the plan itself. It was in the planner. In her absolute, arrogant belief that human beings were predictable systems, that emotion was a bug you could disable, and that a performance crafted from observation could ever be as real as a feeling. She closed the notebook and placed it inside her thick physics textbook. Downstairs, Vivian Sinclair was crying softly, heartsick and terrified for the child she loved. Upstairs, that child was calmly solving for X. And X, very clearly, was her. October 28th arrived wrapped in a low, gray sky. The air felt charged, heavy with the promise of the storm that every forecast had been screaming about for days. For Alara, it wasn't an inconvenience. It was the final, perfect variable clicking into place. Dinner was a silent affair. Vivian picked at her salmon, stealing glances at her daughter, who ate with precise, mechanical bites. The air between them was thick with everything unsaid: the failed therapy appointment Alara had refused to attend, the continuing computer ban, the vast, frozen distance. "Big storm coming," Alara's father, Mark, said, glancing out the window at the gathering dusk. He was a kind, distracted man, an engineer who lived in a world of schematics and often missed the tension in his own home. The meteorological models predict a 94% probability of significant thunder and lightning between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m., Alara said, wiping her mouth with a napkin. Wind gusts up to 50 miles per hour. It's advisable to secure the patio furniture. Vivian just stared at her. The clinical weather report, delivered in that flat tone, in the middle of their silent war. It was somehow the most frightening thing Alara had said all week. As night fell, the storm announced itself. First, a deep, rolling growl in the distance. Then, the first fat raindrops spattering against the windows like thrown stones. By 10 p.m., it was a full-throated roar. The house creaked. The lights flickered once, twice. It was chaos, a perfect, screaming blanket of sound. Alara, in her room, executed her pre-operation checklist with the calm of a surgeon scrubbing in. Item 1. The canine variable. She went downstairs. Their golden retriever, Finn, lay on his plush bed in the den. "Hey, Finn," she said, her voice softening into a convincing mimicry of affection. She crumbled a mild, over-the-counter sleep aid into a scoop of peanut butter. The dog licked it up eagerly, tail thumping. Within 20 minutes, he was in a deep, unnatural sleep, oblivious to the thunder. Neutralized. Item 2. The tool. She waited until she heard her parents' bedroom door shut. She moved down the hall to her father's home office. The gun safe was a small, gray metal box bolted to the floor in the closet. She knelt before it. The combination was her parents' anniversary, July 21st, 04. She'd seen him input it years ago, thinking she was engrossed in a book. The lock released with a soft, heavy clunk. Inside, nestled in foam, was the .38 caliber revolver. It was heavier than she expected. Cold. A simple tool. She took it and a single box of ammunition. She didn't load it yet. Procedure was important. Item 3. The stage. Wearing thin gloves she used for cleaning her computer, she went to the back patio door. With a small pry bar from the garage, she carefully, quietly, jimmied the lock, making it look like a forced entry from the outside. She splashed a puddle of rainwater from the storm onto the interior mat. She then went to her mother's jewelry cabinet in the master bedroom. Her father was a heavy sleeper, and emptied a few expensive-looking pieces into a velvet pouch. She took Vivian's favorite jewelry box, a delicate inlaid thing she'd recently bought on a trip. This would become the thief's take, discarded later to establish motive. She returned to her room. The house was dark, save for the sudden, brutal flashes of lightning that lit up the world in stark, monochrome snapshots. In one flash, she saw her own reflection in the window, pale, focused, empty. She loaded the revolver. The click of the cylinder closing was louder than any thunderclap in her mind. Then, she waited. She knew the pattern. Vivian would come downstairs around 11:30 p.m. for a glass of water. It was a ritual. A variable as predictable as the weather. At 11:28 p.m., Ilara took her position at the bottom of the stairs, hidden in the deeper shadow of the living room archway. The storm was at its peak. Rain lashed the house. A tremendous crack of thunder shook the very foundations. Right on schedule, the master bedroom door opened. A slice of light, then darkness. Soft footsteps on the upper landing. Then, the footsteps coming down the stairs. Vivian appeared, a ghostly figure in a white silk robe, illuminated by another strobing flash of lightning. She was 2 steps from the bottom when she sensed, rather than saw, the presence in the dark. She froze. Ilara. Her voice was sleep-soft, confused. Ilara stepped forward. The lightning flashed again. In that frozen, blue-white instant, Vivian saw her daughter's face. Not scared. Not angry. Blank. And she saw the gun. The understanding in Vivian's eyes wasn't of the gun, but of the look on her daughter's face. It was a realization so profound, so horrifying, it stole her breath before the bullet could. There was no speech. No final plea. Ilara had calculated that emotional exchanges were data noise. She raised the tool. She aligned the sights. And she executed the command. The sound was shocking, a brutal punch in the midst of the storm's roar. Vivian folded silently, a heap of white silk on the dark floor. Ilara didn't look. She was already moving to the next subroutine. She placed the gun in a gardening glove she'd taken from the garage, a glove that belonged to a landscaper her mother had recently fired after an argument. She wiped the gun clean, placed it in the gloved hand, and dropped it near the forced patio door. She then went to the kitchen sink, splashed water on her face, messed her hair. She took a deep, shuddering breath, accessing the trauma victim protocol from her memory banks. Then, she screamed. A high, ragged, utterly convincing sound of childlike terror that cut through the noise of the storm. She ran to her father's door, pounding on it, her voice breaking perfectly. "Daddy! Daddy! Come quick! Somebody's in the house! Mommy!" The performance had begun. When the police arrived 12 minutes later, they found a scene of perfect, tragic chaos. The forced entry, the stolen jewels, the grieving husband, the dog sleeping strangely through it all, and a 14-year-old girl, wrapped in a blanket, shivering and sobbing, unable to form a coherent sentence. They saw a victim. They saw a crime scene. They saw a narrative that made terrible, obvious sense. They didn't see the stage manager, already critiquing her own work behind the mask of tears. And they certainly didn't see the one, small, overlooked detail that wasn't part of the script, the detail that would, weeks later, flicker to life on a police officer's body camera screen and change everything. The first 48 hours after a homicide are a blur of light, sound, and controlled chaos. The Sinclair house, that temple of perfect order, was invaded by it. Forensic techs in paper suits moved like ghosts, dusting for prints, taking photos from every angle. Uniformed officers trampled the pristine rug with muddy boots. The medical examiner's team worked with quiet efficiency under the stark light of portable lamps, preparing Vivian Sinclair's body for its final journey. And in the midst of it all, wrapped in a soft blanket on the white living room sofa, was Alara. She performed masterfully. She'd curl into her father's side, trembling, her eyes wide and unblinking, as if seeing the horror on a loop in her mind. When a female officer offered her a cup of sweet tea, her hand shook so badly she almost spilled it. The officers saw a child in profound shock. They spoke in hushed, gentle tones around her. Detective Mara Reyes arrived just after 1 a.m. She was a woman in her late 40s, with a stillness about her that seemed to absorb the chaos rather than add to it. She had seen enough grief to know its many shapes. She observed the scene first, a silent tour. The forced patio door. The discarded glove with the gun. The empty jewelry cabinet. She knelt by Vivian Sinclair's body for a long time, not touching anything, just looking. Then she observed the living. Mark Sinclair was a hollow man, answering questions in monosyllables, his eyes red and vacant. And then there was the girl. Reyes introduced herself, her voice low and calm. "Alara? I'm Detective Reyes. I know this is impossibly hard. Can you tell me what you saw?" Alara's performance was a masterpiece of fragmented trauma. The choked sentences, the details that were almost too sharp, the big, dark shape, the loud pop that didn't sound like the thunder, and then the convenient gaps. I don't remember his face. It was so dark. She buried her face in the blanket, her shoulders shaking with what looked like perfect, silent sobs. Reyes nodded, her face a mask of professional sympathy. But in the back of her mind, a small, cold gear began to turn. Something was off. It wasn't one thing. It was a collection of tiny, dissonant notes in a symphony of tragedy. Note 1. The dog. The family golden retriever was still asleep in the den, snoring softly, even as strangers filled his home. Reyes, who had a dog of her own, knew a thunderphobic retriever was more common than not. This one hadn't even barked. It was as if he'd been neutralized. Note 2. The staging. The forced door was convincing. But the splashes of rainwater on the inside mat were contained, like someone had poured a cup there. They didn't track anywhere. A man fleeing in a panic through a storm doesn't step neatly. Note 3. The glove. It was a left-handed gardening glove. The gun was in its palm. But the jimmied door showed pressure marks consistent with a right-handed tool use. A small thing. A detail only someone looking for a puzzle would notice. Reyes said nothing. She just collected the notes in the file of her mind. The next day, at the precinct, the narrative was solidifying. A tragic, botched burglary. A wealthy neighborhood. A storm for cover. The fired landscaper with a known temper became the obvious suspect. The department was ready to run with it. Reyes wasn't. She requested the family's case file, especially the initial interviews. She sat in her quiet office, replaying Alara's recorded statement. And that's where she heard it. The slip. The victim advocate was asking Alara about her mother. What was she like, honey, when she wasn't scared? Alara's voice, fragile and thin on the recording, replied, She had a lot of performative empathy. It was her primary mode of social navigation. But underneath, she was prone to narcissistic injury if her gestures weren't reciprocated. Reyes stopped the tape. She rewound it, played it again. Prone to narcissistic injury. That wasn't the language of a grieving 14-year-old. That was the cold, clinical language of a psychology textbook. It was a diagnosis. An analysis. It was the kind of thing you'd say about someone, not about your freshly murdered mother when you're drowning in grief. It was the first real crack. Not in the crime scene, but in the performance. Meanwhile, Alara, now staying with her aunt, was riding a wave of grim satisfaction. The house was full of casseroles and pitying looks. Her father was a ghost. All the annoying controls, the screen time limits, the demands for affection, the therapy, were gone. She had optimized her environment. In the quiet of her aunt's guest room, she did something reckless. Arrogant. She opened a new, encrypted vlog on her phone, the camera close on her face. Post-event analysis. Day 3, she whispered, a faint, triumphant smile on her lips. The external narrative is stable. The designated suspect is being pursued. The paternal unit is non-functional, granting maximum autonomy. The emotional performance continues to yield the desired results. The primary constraint has been successfully deleted. She paused, her eyes gleaming with intellectual pride. It was the correct calculation. The system is now mine. She ended the recording and securely saved it. She believed it was a private trophy, a testament to her brilliance. She didn't know that Detective Mara Reyes, from miles away, was listening to a tape of her using words no shattered child should know, and was now drafting a warrant for all of Alara Sinclair's digital devices. The hunt for the burglar was a facade. The real investigation had just begun, and it was focused squarely on the grieving girl on the sofa, whose perfect performance had just uttered its first, irrevocable flaw. Alara believed she was playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers. But Detective Reyes was just starting to learn the rules of her game. If you're hooked on this psychological unraveling, make sure you're subscribed. The walls are about to start closing in. The warrant landed on Detective Mara Reyes's desk with the weight of a gamble. It wasn't for the house. That scene had been picked over. This warrant was for the ghost in the machine, for every byte of data on Alara Sinclair's school-issued laptop, her phone, and any cloud accounts linked to her. It was a fishing expedition in a digital ocean, and Reyes had a feeling the fish she was after was a shark. Down in the digital forensics lab, a young analyst named Leo with tired eyes and endless cups of coffee took the devices. To most people, a teenager's computer is a chaotic dump of memes, music, and school essays. To Leo, it was a crime scene with better lighting. He started with the surface. The laptop was suspiciously clean. School projects, equestrian team schedules, a few playlists titled Focus Logic. The browser history was a bland landscape of academic sites and Wikipedia. It was the digital equivalent of a perfectly made bed with nothing under it. Too perfect. She's smart, Leo muttered to Reyes, who was leaning against his desk, watching the screens. She's using a private browsing shell. But she's also 14. Nobody's that disciplined. She's got a hidey hole. He began to look for the whispers. The metadata, the hidden logs of when files were created, accessed, even if they were later deleted. He found anomalies. Large blocks of time, late at night, where the computer's processor was running high, but there was no corresponding activity in any visible program. It was like watching a ghost type on a keyboard. Then he found the ping. A tiny, encrypted signal sent from the laptop every few days to a cloud server with a domain name that looked like gibberish. A proxy. A digital middleman meant to obscure the final destination. Got a trail, Leo said, his fingers flying. She's routed through 2 offshore servers. It's a matryoshka doll. But every doll leaves a fingerprint. He started peeling back the layers, following the faint heat signature of data. 2 hours later, he cracked the outer shell. And there it was. Not 1, but 2 vaults. The first was the encrypted journal. The password was a 64-character string of letters, numbers, and symbols. Leo didn't try to guess it. He used a forensic tool that isolated the encrypted file and mimicked the laptop system, tricking it into thinking it was a normal access attempt. The journal unfolded on his screen like a poisonous flower. Reyes read over his shoulder, her coffee going cold in her hand. This wasn't a diary. It was a project log. Entry 17. Subject's emotional appeals are increasing in frequency. A clear sign of system instability. My continued disengagement is the optimal stressor. Entry 23. Acquired the combination for the secure storage unit. The tool is accessible. The storm front is predicted for the 28th. Optimal conditions confirmed. Entry 24. Final simulation run. Trauma victim, protocol parameters loaded. Key emotional indicators to mimic. Confusion, helplessness, delayed grief. Must avoid overperformance. It was the blueprint. Cold, precise, and utterly devoid of anything human. Reyes felt a chill that had nothing to do with the lab's air conditioning. She was watching a murder being planned in real time, in the past tense. "There's more," Leo said, his voice hushed. "Video files." He opened the second vault. It was a private video channel. 6 entries. Thumbnails showed Alara's face, close to the camera, in what looked like a guest room. The most recent was time-stamped 3 days after the murder. Reyes clicked play. The Alara on screen was unrecognizable from the sobbing girl on the sofa. Her face was calm, lit by the blue glow of her phone. She was almost smiling. "Post-event analysis. Day 3, she whispered to the camera. "The external narrative is stable. The designated suspect is being pursued. The paternal unit is non-functional, granting maximum autonomy. The emotional performance continues to yield the desired results." She paused, and a flicker of pure, unadulterated pride passed over her features. "The primary constraint has been successfully deleted. It was the correct calculation." Reyes stopped the video. The silence in the lab was profound. The hum of servers filled the space where their breaths should have been. "We have her," Leo said, a mix of triumph and revulsion in his voice. "It's all right here. Motive, method, confession." But Reyes was already thinking 3 steps ahead, into a courtroom. She shook her head slowly. "What we have is a smart, traumatized girl who wrote dark fiction and made weird videos after her mother was killed. That's what a $500 an hour defense attorney is going to say. Your Honor, my client was processing unimaginable trauma through creative writing and self-documentation. This is a symptom of grief, not a blueprint for murder." Leo's face fell. But the details, the storm date, the safe combination. Coincidence. Poetic license. They'll say she incorporated real-life details into a fantasy world as a coping mechanism. The videos? A dissociative episode. They'll have expert witnesses, child psychologists, lining up to explain it all away. Reyes leaned back, rubbing her temples. "It's compelling. It's horrifying. But to a jury, it's a ghost. It's all ones and zeros. We need something it touched. We need a fingerprint from this digital ghost on the physical world." She had the mind of the killer, laid bare on a screen. But she needed the hand of the killer on the crime scene. The journal mentioned the jewelry box, the staged theft. It was a key part of the plan. Reyes's thoughts returned to the evidence locker, to the collection of items from the Sinclair house. The stolen jewelry, recovered from the creek. The delicate, inlaid box. Something about it nagged at her. A detail in the journal, a detail at the scene. They weren't aligning perfectly. The ghost had left a clue, not in its words, but in its arrogance, in what it believed was too unimportant to perfectly stage. The digital hunt was over. Now, she needed to find the one real-world thing the ghost had forgotten to haunt. Detective Reyes spent the next day in the quiet, fluorescent-lit cavern of the evidence vault. The physical artifacts of the Sinclair case were bagged, tagged, and lined up on a metal cart. The pry bar. The gardening glove, still holding the cold weight of the .38. Photographs of the forced door. And then, the items labeled, "Property, recovered." A velvet pouch containing a diamond tennis bracelet and a pair of emerald earrings, and beside it, the jewelry box. It was a beautiful thing. Small, about the size of a hardcover book, made of a dark, polished wood with a delicate inlaid pattern of mother-of-pearl flowers on the lid. It looked old, expensive, and deeply personal. The perfect token for a thief to grab. Reyes pulled on a pair of blue nitrile gloves. She picked up the box, feeling its weight. She opened it. The interior was lined with crushed red velvet, empty now. According to the report, it had been found submerged in Hunter's Creek, about a mile from the Sinclair house, snagged on a branch. The theory was the burglar had panicked, dumped the obvious loot, and kept the smaller, more easily fensible jewelry. She studied the forensics report attached to the box. It was concise. Item: wooden jewelry box. Processing. Checked for latent prints. Result. Negative. Surface wiped clean. Reyes read that line again. Negative. Wiped clean. She put the box down and picked up the velvet pouch. She loosened the drawstring and let the bracelet and earrings spill onto the stainless steel table. They glittered under the lights. She checked their forensic report. Items: 1 platinum/diamond bracelet, 1 pair gold/emerald earrings. Processing. Checked for latent prints. Result: partial smudge on bracelet clasp, unusable. Earrings. Negative. She looked from the pouch to the box. A thought, slow and cold, began to crystallize. She went back to her office and pulled up the digital journal on her screen. She found the entry she was looking for, dated 2 days before the murder. Inventory for narrative construction. Requires tangible motive for external threat. Subject's jewelry cabinet contains 37 items. Selection criteria. High perceived value, portable. Include the primary container, the inlaid box, to reinforce domestic violation narrative. Dispose of container separately to simulate panic. Ilara's plan was right there. Take the box, dump it to sell the story. But plans, especially ones made by arrogant minds thinking 10 steps ahead, have a way of tripping over the one stupid, obvious step right in front of them. Reyes picked up her phone and called down to the forensic lab. Leo, I need a favor. Pull the General Layton's report from the Sinclair master bedroom. Specifically, the surfaces around the jewelry cabinet. A few minutes later, the report hit her inbox. She scanned it. Prints all over the place. Vivian's, Mark's, a few unknowns that would be checked against housekeepers. On the vanity. On the cabinet's glass doors. On the drawer handles. She called again. Leo, was the interior of that jewelry cabinet dusted? Standard practice, he said. Yeah. They lifted a bunch of partials and smudges from the velvet lining inside. Mostly the victims, a few of the fathers. Nothing unusual. Reyes felt the pieces click together with an almost audible sound. She leaned back in her chair, staring at the evidence photo of the beautiful, empty box. Leo, she said, her voice tight with focus. Think it through with me. A burglar is in a dark house during a storm. He's just shot a woman. He's panicking. He goes to the jewelry cabinet. He sees a fancy box. He grabs it, stuffs some loose jewelry inside, or maybe just grabs the whole thing and runs. What does he not do? Over the phone, she could almost hear Leo's brain shifting gears. He doesn't stop to wipe everything down. Exactly. He leaves prints. He leaves a mess. He leaves evidence of his panic. But this box, she tapped the photo. It was wiped clean. Not a single print. Not even the victims. How is that possible? Silence. Then, Leo got it. The only person who would wipe that box clean is someone who knew it was going to be evidence. Someone who needed to make sure no prints linked it to the house. A burglar wouldn't care. He'd just throw it away. It's not evidence of a theft, Reyes said, the certainty solidifying into iron. It's evidence of a staging. It proves someone with guilty knowledge was constructing a scene. But she needed more. One more thread to tie the digital ghost to this physical flaw. She called Mark Sinclair. His voice was a hollow echo. Mr. Sinclair, sorry to bother you. The jewelry box we recovered, the inlaid one. How long had your wife owned it? A long pause. The wooden one with the flowers? Yes. Not long. She loved it. Saw it in an artisan shop during our weekend trip to Hocking Hills last month. Bought it right there. It was a new favorite. Why? Last month. Reyes thanked him and hung up. Her heart was pounding now. She went to the financial records warrant. Scanned through Vivian Sinclair's credit card statements. And there it was. A charge from Hill Country Artisans. Date: September 18th. Amount: $245. Ilara's journal entry was dated October 26th. She'd inventoried her mother's jewelry cabinet as part of her plan. She saw the box, noted it as the primary container. But she didn't know it was brand new. To her, it was just part of the scenery, another piece of her mother's cluttered, sentimental world. She had no emotional context for it, so she assigned it only a functional role, a prop. And that was the fatal oversight. A real burglar wouldn't know if a box was new or old. He'd just grab it. But the planner, the one who wrote the journal, she treated the box as a known, permanent fixture. She didn't account for the fact that its provenance could be traced to a specific, recent time. She didn't consider that a forensics team would wonder why a box a wife cherished enough to buy on a romantic trip weeks ago bore no traces of her ever touching it. The ghost in the machine had forgotten the real world leaves receipts. It had forgotten that love leaves fingerprints. Reyes now had what she needed. The digital journal was the why. The wiped clean, newly purchased jewelry box was the how. It was the tangible, physical proof that the crime scene was a construction. It was the wire that connected the cold, digital mind to the warm, human world it tried to manipulate. She had the arrogant monster's fatal flaw. It wasn't in her intelligence. It was in her contempt. She thought the details of the human heart, sentiment, history, love, were irrelevant data. And that one irrelevant box was about to become the key that locked her away forever. The trial of the state of Ohio versus Alara Sinclair began not with a bang, but with a hushed, collective intake of breath. The gallery was packed. Media, morbidly curious neighbors, and a handful of true crime podcasters leaned forward, their notebooks ready. At the defense table, Alara sat, a study in composed fragility. She wore a simple, light gray sweater dress. Her hair was down, softening her features. She had mastered the art of appearing both present and utterly lost. Clayton Reed, her attorney, was a maestro in a $5,000 suit. He didn't just present a case, he conducted a symphony of doubt. His opening statement was a masterpiece of emotional engineering. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, his voice a resonant, sorrowful baritone. "What you are about to hear is not a story of cold-blooded murder. It is a story of pressure, of a breaking point. It is the tragedy of a child who was loved, yes, but loved in a way that felt like suffocation." He painted Vivian Sinclair not as a victim, but as a subtle tyrant. The perfect home became a gilded cage of expectations. The equestrian competitions were relentless quests for vicarious glory. The concern about therapy was reframed as a demand for total emotional compliance. He used Vivian's own words, texts about grades, emails to coaches, and twisted them ever so slightly, making nurturing sound like nagging, making worry sound like control. "Vivian Sinclair," Reed said, lowering his voice to a confidential tone, "did not see a daughter. She saw a project, a reflection of her own perfect life. And when that project began to think for itself, to reject the script, the pressure in that house became unbearable." He walked over and placed a gentle hand on Alara's shoulder. She looked up at him, her eyes wide and glassy. This young girl did not plan a murder. She experienced a catastrophic system failure. The prosecution will show you journals, the dark, fictional musings of an isolated mind under immense stress. They will show you videos of a child so traumatized, she dissociated from reality itself. This is not evidence of guilt. It is a roadmap of a psyche shattering. It was brilliant. He was taking Alara's own cold, clinical language and repackaging it as symptoms. Her intelligence became a vulnerability. Her lack of emotion became proof of a breakdown. He was building the exact defense Detective Reyes had predicted. The prosecution's opening felt solid but plodding in comparison. They laid out the facts, the staged break-in, the recovered gun, the digital journal. But facts felt cold next to Reed's compelling narrative of a broken home. Then, the defense called its star witness, Alara Sinclair. She took the stand like a ghost ascending. She was petite in the large wooden chair, sworn in with a voice so soft the judge had to ask her to speak up. Clayton Reed approached her not as a lawyer, but as a kindly uncle. "Alara," he said, his voice soothing, "I know this is hard. Let's start with your mother. Can you describe your relationship for the jury?" Ilara's lower lip trembled. She looked down at her hands, folded neatly in her lap. It was complicated. I loved her. But I always felt I was a character in a play she was writing. If I said the wrong line, or didn't hit the right mark, the whole house would go quiet. It was a very heavy quiet. The performance was nuanced. She wasn't hateful. She was confused. A child trying to understand why love felt like a weight. The journal the prosecutors found, Reed continued. Can you tell us about that? Ilara nodded, a single tear tracing a perfect path down her cheek. It was a place to put the bad thoughts. The scary, angry feelings I could never say out loud. After Mom suggested therapy, I was so scared. I thought, if I wrote the worst possible things, got them out on paper, they wouldn't be in my head anymore. It was like exorcising demons. She used the metaphor perfectly, sounding both poetic and profoundly sad. And the videos? The ones where you're speaking so analytically. I don't really remember making those, she whispered, her gaze becoming distant. After it happened, nothing felt real. I felt like I was floating outside my body, watching some other girl. I think I was trying to explain it to myself. To make it make sense. Because it didn't make any sense. She was reframing her arrogance as dissociation. Her clinical analysis as a trauma response. It was a high-wire act of sheer, audacious manipulation. The cross-examination was tense. The prosecutor, a no-nonsense woman named Amanda Clark, went after the details of the journal, the specific planning, the combination to the safe. Isn't it true, Miss Sinclair, that you wrote these entries as a step-by-step guide to murdering your mother? Ilara's eyes filled with fresh, believable tears. No. It was a story. A dark fantasy about being free. I never thought any of it was real. It was just a place where I could be in control, because in real life, I felt like I had none. She clung to the fantasy defense, and it was slippery. Clark pushed on the jewelry box, but Ilara just looked bewildered. I was so scared that night. I just saw a dark shape. I don't remember a box. After 2 grueling hours, she was allowed to step down. As she walked back to the defense table, she moved slowly, as if carrying the weight of the world. But as she sat, and her attorney gave her a reassuring nod, she allowed her eyes to sweep across the jury. And for one fleeting, unguarded second, the mask slipped. The tears dried up. The vulnerable slump of her shoulders straightened, just a fraction. In her eyes, where there had been foggy confusion, there was a flash of sharp, clear assessment. She was reading the room, gauging her impact. She saw the hesitant sympathy on some jurors' faces. She saw the frustration on the prosecutors. She saw her father, head in his hands, and looked away without a flicker. In that moment, she believed she was winning. The logic of her performance was holding. The system, she thought, was processing her data as she intended. A faint, almost imperceptible version of that old, knowing smile touched her lips before vanishing, replaced once more by a look of exhausted sorrow. The theater was packed, the audience was engrossed, and the lead actress was convinced the show was hers. She had no idea the director was about to change the entire final act. The day after Ilara's testimony, the courtroom felt different. The air, thick with the lingering scent of her performance, had gone stale. The jury looked weary, burdened by the complicated portrait of grief and pressure they'd been sold. Clayton Reed had the subtle confidence of a gambler holding a good hand. Prosecutor Amanda Clark stood up. She looked tired, but there was a new, focused intensity in her eyes. It was the look of someone who has been circling in the dark and finally found the light switch. Your Honor, the state recalls Detective Mara Reyes to the stand. Reyes walked back up, her posture as calm and unshakable as it had been on the first day. Clark approached her. Detective, you've described for us the defendant's digital journal and videos. The defense has characterized these as fictional musings, trauma-induced dissociation. Did your investigation uncover any physical evidence that corroborated the specific plans laid out in those digital files? Yes, Reyes said. The jewelry box. Reed was on his feet. Objection, Your Honor. The source and handling of the jewelry box has already been entered into evidence. This is redundant. Judge Wentworth peered over his glasses. Overruled. The witness may continue. I'm interested in the connection. Detective, Clark continued. Please explain. Reyes turned slightly to face the jury. The journal specified using the victim's jewelry box as a primary container to stage a burglary. The box was found discarded, wiped completely clean of fingerprints. This is forensically inconsistent with a panicked thief. It is, however, perfectly consistent with someone following a plan to remove evidence. Reed gave a dismissive wave. A theory, Detective. A guess. It's more than a theory, Reyes said, her voice cutting through his disdain. Because the journal treated the box as a known, permanent fixture. But financial records show Vivian Sinclair purchased that box just weeks before her death, on a trip with her husband. The defendant, in her planning, treated it as set dressing. She didn't account for its newness, or for the fact that a cherished new object would bear no trace of its owner. It was a mistake. A small, physical oversight in a digital plan. A murmur rippled through the gallery. It was a good point. A solid point. But Reed's narrative was strong enough to absorb it. He could still call it a coincidence, a quirk of fate. The jury's faces showed they were listening, but not yet convinced. Then, Amanda Clark did something unexpected. She didn't press further on the box. She changed direction. Detective Reyes, in addition to the victim's home, you also processed all official documentation from the scene. Is that correct? Yes. Photographs, officer reports, evidence logs. And that includes all body-worn camera footage from the responding officers? It does. It's standard to archive all such footage. And did you review all of that footage? My team did. Initially, it was reviewed for the actions of the suspected intruder. Later, at my request, it was reviewed again for contextual consistency. Clark walked to the prosecutor's table and picked up a remote. Your Honor, the state moves to enter into evidence states Exhibit 47. This is a segment of body-worn camera footage from Officer Daniel Perez, who was the second responder on the scene. It was previously catalogued as general scene documentation. Its full relevance has only recently been established. Reed surged to his feet. Objection. This is a blatant ambush, Your Honor. The discovery period is closed. Judge Wentworth didn't even look at him. His eyes were on Clark. Prosecutor, this evidence was provided to the defense in discovery, was it not? It was, Your Honor. On Disc 3 of the initial evidence dump, labeled Officer BWC, Full Archives. Its significance only became clear when cross-referenced with the defendant's own digital timeline, which we received later. We are offering it now, at the earliest opportunity. The judge nodded. Overruled. You may proceed. The large screen in the courtroom flickered to life. The quality was grainy, dark, shaky. The timestamp in the bottom corner glowed, 23 hours 22 minutes and 4 seconds. October 28, 2022. The audio was a chaos of radio static, urgent voices, and the dying wail of the storm. The point of view jolted through the Sinclair kitchen, a nightmare of flashing lights and moving shadows. It was visceral, immediate. The camera swept past other officers, past the terrible, sheet-draped form on the floor. For a heart-stopping second, it landed on Mark Sinclair. His face a mask of such primal anguish that several jurors looked away. Then, the officer wearing the camera turned, called by someone. Perez, check the perimeter door. The camera swung quickly through the formal living room. And there she was. For 2, maybe 3 seconds, she was alone in the frame. Ilara. The blanket around her shoulders. Sitting on the edge of the white sofa. And in these 3 stolen seconds, the performance stopped. The hysterical shivering vanished. The wide, terrified eyes went blank, the pupils contracting slightly as they scanned the room. The hand clutching the blanket went slack. Her face, which had been a masterpiece of distorted fear, smoothed into an expression of utterly calm, utterly cold assessment. Her eyes moved left to right, like a scanner, checking the forced door, watching the cops, analyzing the chaos. It was the look of a director watching a complicated scene unfold, making sure every prop was where it should be. It was a look of pure, unadulterated control. Then, from off-camera, a voice. "Kid? You okay?" A paramedic approached. In a blink so fast it was inhuman, the mask slammed back down. Her body crumpled, her face melted back into shattered confusion, a soft whimper escaping her lips as the paramedic knelt before her. The screen went black. The silence in the courtroom wasn't just an absence of sound. It was a vacuum that sucked the air, the thought, the very possibility out of the space. It was the sound of a narrative shattering. Every juror was frozen, eyes locked on the dark screen where that 3-second truth had just played out. Amanda Clark let the silence hang for a 5 count. Then she turned to Detective Reyes. Her voice was quiet in the stunned room. "Detective, based on your expertise and your investigation of the defendant's digital journals, how would you characterize the expression we just saw on the defendant's face in those 3 seconds? Reyes turned her gaze from the screen to Ilara. Ilara was staring straight ahead, her face as white as the porcelain of a doll. The practiced tears were gone. Every muscle was rigid. Reyes answered, her words falling like stones. "That, ma'am, is not trauma. That is not dissociation. That is a quality control check." The video ended, but the image it burned into the room didn't fade. That 3-second lapse, that cold, calculating blankness, hung in the air, more real and more damning than any piece of physical evidence. It was the unscripted moment. The truth that leaked out when the performer thought the cameras were off. Ilara didn't move. She sat perfectly still at the defense table, her knuckles white where she gripped the edge. The pale, careful fragility was gone, replaced by a wax-figure stillness. The performance was over. She knew it. Everyone knew it. The legal machinery ground forward. Closing arguments were a blur. Clayton Reed's voice sounded hollow now, his elegant theories about trauma and pressure crumbling to dust in the face of those 3 seconds of pure, unfeeling analysis. Amanda Clark's final words were simple. She planned it. She executed it. She tried to perform her way out of it. The mask slipped. You saw what was underneath. The jury was out for less than 4 hours. They filed back in, their faces solemn, avoiding looking at the girl in the gray dress. "Foreperson," the clerk said, her voice echoing. "On the count of murder in the 2nd degree, how do you find?" "We find the defendant, Ilara Sinclair, guilty." There was no gasp. No outcry. It was a verdict met with a heavy, almost relieved silence. The truth had already been delivered by a body-worn camera. This was just the paperwork. Sentencing was set for 2 weeks later. But in many ways, the sentence was pronounced right there in the courtroom, the moment the video stopped playing. When they reconvened, Ilara stood before Judge Wentworth. She wore county-issued clothes now, shapeless and dull. The veneer was utterly stripped away. Her face was that of a sullen, frightened child, but her eyes held a new, hollow understanding. The system had not been fooled. Her logic had failed. Judge Wentworth adjusted his glasses and looked at her, not with anger, but with a profound, weary gravity. "Ilara Sinclair," he began, his voice like old stone. "You orchestrated this tragedy under the belief that your intelligence rendered you immune to consequence. You treated human life as a logistical problem and this court as a system you could outsmart." He paused, letting the weight of the words settle. "You are correct that you are intelligent. But you made the most fundamental error an intelligent person can make. You confused knowledge with wisdom, and calculation with understanding. You had the blueprint for a perfect crime. But you failed to account for the human heart, your mother's, which loved you, and the hearts of the jurors, who recognized its absence in you." Ilara's head was bowed. A tremor, not performed but utterly real, ran through her frame. "The law sees a child who committed an adult's crime," the judge continued. "It will attempt to balance punishment with the possibility of rehabilitation. You are hereby sentenced to the Department of Youth Services until your 21st birthday. At that time, you will be transferred to the Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Correction to serve a term of 15 years to life." He set down the paper. This is not a triumph of justice. It is a tragedy measured in years. I hope one day you learn the difference between being clever and being human. Court is adjourned. As the bailiff moved to lead her away, Ilara finally broke. Not into dramatic sobs, but into a silent, shuddering collapse inward. The arrogance was gone, incinerated in the courtroom's glare. What was left was just a terrified girl, finally realizing the walls of the maze she built had closed in forever. She was led through the side door, out of the curated world she tried to control, and into a concrete one where she controlled nothing. The belief that one is smarter than everyone else in the room is often the first and largest crack in the foundation. This was a fictional exploration of that darkness. If this story gripped you, please let me know your thoughts in the comments below. What was the moment you knew Ilara's facade would break? And for more deep dives into the psychology of a crime, remember to subscribe and hit the notification bell. Until next time.